right, good morning, everyone. My name is Christopher Donaldson. I'm excited to have y'all here. What we're talking about today is, how compliance as a service can save you. It could save you $1 million, and it sounds crazy to think about it that way in terms of like the numbers, but we'll go through some math later, and it's not nearly as crazy or far away as may seem for some of y'all. So, anyway, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. So by way of introduction, I mentioned my name is Christopher Donaldson. So I lead the managed programs and security consulting practice here at Risk 360. I've been with the firm for going on 3 years now, but I've been in the security space for around 10 years at this point. Seen a lot of different things, a lot of different size companies. I'm excited to pass on some of those lessons learned to y'all here. So what can we expect from the next? We'll kind of try to keep it tight. I'm just gonna know that folks have things going on this morning. And by the way, thank y'all for your time in advance. So real quick, what we're going to do is go through, why security compliance is potentially a good place to look for some savings, to what is actually the playbook that we run that gets run to massively reduce your costs when it comes to security compliance, and then how to think about an ROI when it comes to cost savings for security compliance. So first off the bat, if you need to cut cybersecurity spend, that's the objective, right? However we got here, we want to look firstly at things that are considered contextual capabilities for your security program, right? So Jeffrey Moore coined this term in one of his books, core versus context. And core activities are things that are differentiating, and contextual competencies are ones that they need to be done. They need to be done really well, but they don't directly contribute to your company's to differentiating your company from your competitors or from creating a competitive advantage. So those are typically the first candidates for adjusting spend in some way, whether it be rationalizing tool sets or anything, or finding different ways of delivering those capabilities. Those tend to be the first competencies because they don't directly compete or contribute to your competitive advantage. For most organizations, security compliance is contextual. Now, I know what you may be thinking, right? That we rely on security compliance for, we have a bunch of revenue that's tied to security compliance, right? It helps us be able to play in this particular market and what have you. And I very much understand that. And at a certain point, everybody else in the pool that you're playing in, everyone else in that, all your competitors have the same, certifications as you do, right? If you have to have ISO, it means they have ISO as well. If you have SOC 2, they have SOC 2 as well. At a certain point, once you've entered the market and been in there for a little bit, those security compliance certifications become table stakes rather than differentiating. They no longer open up a new market. It's just the price of admission at that point, right? So I guess in that same vein, I do want to touch on something real quick. So first of all, the situation of having to cut costs, whether it be motivated purely by you and your peers at the C-suite, or whether it's something that you're trying to do just to improve the company, or whether it's being forced on you, or it's a directive that's been given by the board, by potentially an investor or a group of investors. It can be a very hard situation, and for most organizations, it's a challenge for sure, and that's definitely not lost on us, right? It's a hard situation to be in, and we certainly are not in any way trying to make light of that. We are just trying to help, because your objective, whether it be self-motivated or being a directive that's been given to you, you still have the objective to meet of reducing costs, and we're trying to provide a very safe, reliable way of doing that has been proven to work, and while maintaining the compliance standards, while maintaining the certifications that you need to keep the business moving, to keep your accounts happy, and to keep to maintain your revenue stream. Additionally, when it comes to security compliance, which we just talked about in the last slide, yes, security compliance is hard. First of all, it is not an easy thing to do, right? To find a way to reduce your security compliance spend massively versus marginally. You can make marginal cuts, making or dramatically reducing your spend is hard. Um, it can be very scary, right? What if something breaks? What if we lose our certs? What if it doesn't work? What if? And security compliance is technical. It's challenging, um, and but we are up for the challenge, and we have been able to do this for other clients, and it does work, and it works really well. And we want to share that with y'all as an option as you're thinking about ways to reduce your security spend moving forward. So, how do we actually do it? Like, what are the plays when it comes to reducing your security compliance spend with compliance as a service, right? And we'll go over what compliance as a service is in a bit, but just want to walk you through the playbook, right? So, number one, when it comes to security compliance, you have more than likely multiple frameworks you're dealing with multiple products. You need to get all of those controls into one single consolidated controls framework. That's one framework. It would have your ISO, SOC 2, PCI, high trust, what have you, inside of one controls list, deduplicated so that you have one control that can receive multiple pieces of, or that can satisfy multiple frameworks. That way, a control owner can own one control for this framework versus owning 5 controls across 5 frameworks they have to provide the same evidence for. That is really the key here. At least it's the foundation of this entire, what makes this whole thing work. Secondly, consolidate your external auditors down to the fewest possible. Ideally, we want to be working with one external audit firm for your certification process, right? And we want to get them on the bus as early as possible. We want to get those auditors then on board with this consolidated controls framework. Highly encourage you, be collaborative and use your external auditor as a partner in this process, right? Because if you can build, if whatever you're building, they're on board with from the get-go, there is a tremendously higher likelihood of success, or your likelihood of success is tremendously higher throughout this process. And the friction that you probably would get with an external auditor otherwise it resolves itself, which is very powerful. It makes this a lot more sane for the whole process, right? Then you're going to stick that framework into a tool. You're going to operationalize it, meaning you're going to tag owners to it. You're going to do all the alignment to your cadences and your dates and such, and you're going to initialize it, which means you're going to actually get things, all the initial evidence in as well. So in that process, please, and we'll go over recommended, just some things to consider in the next slide, but just want to encourage you as we go through this part. This is a very highly collaborative process between your compliance as a service provider and you, and then also the product owners, right? So keep that in mind. And this basically sets up the entire program. We'll go over one other thing when it comes to tooling for that in a second. The fifth thing you do is you run, once you have everything in a tool, right? You have your consolidated framework, your auditor's on board. Your auditor, ideally, is on board with what you've developed. You have stuck that whole thing inside of a tool and you've operationalized it and initialized all the initial evidence, and you've gotten everything to a good spot. That's when you turn the switch on and have your managed partner or managed service provider start running continuous monitoring against that consolidated controls framework, right? You want to have really rigorous reporting, accountability, and escalations. And you need that to be true because part of this process is you want to still maintain control of your security compliance program ultimately, right? What you're doing as a part of this is you're not just handing it off and then washing your hands of it, right? You still want to have control, though you're not the one doing all of the work and running everything, of your security compliance program. And that is how you mitigate the risk that things go off the rails, right? You should feel very empowered as the CISO, as the director of security, if you're a PE firm, as the owner of that, that portfolio company, or of that company in your portfolio, to poke, to escalate, to be in, to still have a large sense of ownership, or at least of what actually becomes the case. And because of that, your security or compliance as a service provider should provide you with as much direction and information and reporting so that you can make those executive level decisions in a timely manner. And then lastly, we're going to go and we're going to execute a single external audit, right? So this is where that whole, we come full circle with the auditors. The compliance as a service provider is going to work with the external audit partner to actually execute a single external audit, which means your control owners are in, one set of meetings, and your external auditors are using all the output from those meetings, all of the evidence that's been provided to do, their reports for potentially several frameworks across multiple products. That is the idea here. That's how this works effectively. That's how this works and actually gives you some savings. We're consolidating efforts, and we're also leveraging a managed service provider for your security compliance program. So some pro tips. So you really need a purpose-built tool to run this. You cannot, as much as we would like it to be true, you cannot run a harmonized program like this out of Excel. We tried. It did not go well. I know many people who have, or many organizations who also have tried, and it also does not go well. So you need a tool that's purpose-built to do this. Risk 360 does have a tool. I'm happy to provide some information about that, at the end. But that is, regardless if you've used Full Circle or if you use something else, you need a tool that's going to run this for you. Additionally, on the front end, when you're doing your consolidated scope or your consolidated framework, you have to get your scopes squared away from the start. So what controls are going to be done or going to be owned at the maybe enterprise layer, right? As a shared service. What is going to be run at the product layer? What's going to be run at the application layer, or like by application or by system, right? What's being run, what controls are being applicable at the, if you have multiple business units, right? At the business unit layer, because those sometimes can operate fairly independently from each other. And so they may have their own shared services layer. So make sure you get your scopes squared away from the start. Otherwise, you'll get to the end of this process with your managed services partner, your CaaS partner, and your process will be delayed quite significantly. You also need to get your product and your business unit owners on the bus early, as this is really going to impact them in a very positive way, but it's still going to impact them, right? So because things are going to be a lot more centralized out of the tool, and centralized out of using a managed partner to help run things, they need to be very well aware of what the expectations are, aware of how much this is going to actually save them time. Because when you reduce engineers' time by 2/3, that's going to be a massive motivator for these product owners and business units owners to get on the bus and really help drive this forward. Because the more time the engineers get back, the more time they have to actually work on product, which is at the end of the day what we're trying to do here. And then lastly, and I mentioned this again, but I cannot reiterate this enough, you have to get your external auditor on board from the get-go. I'm going to take a look at the questions here. Cool. And then Andy, if there are any questions, just feel free to raise a hand, and I'll pause and pivot. But we will ask questions at the end. We'll definitely have room for that.
Sounds good. We'll do.
Cool. All right. So let's go over the math, because that's what everyone actually cares about here. How do we actually get to the math of all this, right? So first of all, there are really two kinds of security compliance costs. So number one, you have explicit costs. So just to take a step back, when we're talking about you thinking about a case for CAN compliance as a service, which is functionally me leveraging a managed service for my security compliance. When I'm thinking about, does that make sense for my organization? Does the math work? Do the numbers work out? You have to think about it in terms of two kinds of costs. Explicit costs, These are the ones that you probably think of when you think of security compliance, right? These are your dedicated FTEs, and this is your external audit, right? For a company that has 3 or 4 different products with, I don't know, 3 to 4 different compliance frameworks, depending on how big your scopes are, you may have 6 analysts, 2 per product, and then maybe a compliance manager, right? So you have 7 FTEs running 3 to 4 different products with 3 to 4 compliance frameworks each, maybe more, right? For your external audit, that means you probably have, for each product, you have a separate audit, and also for each individual, or each product has 3 different audits or 3 to 4 different audits, because you have 3 to 4 different frameworks per product. So you actually have somewhere between 9 and 12 individual audits that are actually going on in this case, depending on how it's all cut up for you. So this can be quite overwhelming from the get-go. But in addition to your explicit costs, you have these implicit costs when it comes to your security compliance program. These are your GRC tooling, right? Because you're obviously paying for a tool for the purpose of running your security compliance program. You have non-dedicated resource time. So this is the time suck that security compliance can be on your non-GRC, FTEs in the organization, engineering, HR, IT, other parts of security, right? Maybe it's the SOC, maybe it's security engineering, maybe it's identity and access management. There's several different places where it can come from. This is, impacts to other people's time. Maybe it's the product owner itself, right? Maybe it's the application owner who's not in IT. You probably have external consulting costs. If you're doing ISO, you likely have someone who's doing your internal audit. If it's not you, those are additional fees. You probably are paying a professional services firm already, because you just need some help, right? You need some perspective. You need some, hey, we have this weird situation come up with this application doing this weird thing. We want to maintain high trust. How do we navigate this? Those, you got to consider those as well. And then lastly, and this one kind of is the most hidden one, for the GRC tool you have to support that tool. There are costs associated with standing up, configuring and maintaining the GRC tool itself. Now, in the old days, I won't say old days, for some organizations, I know they have entire teams that are dedicated just to running Archer, as an example, for maybe an on-prem deployment of Archer. ServiceNow, people can use ServiceNow. I know large teams supporting ServiceNow, but regardless, that may be an extreme, but you have people who spend time supporting a tool that is directly involved in and relates to your security compliance program. So you have to take those costs into consideration as well, because that means if they're working on that, they're not working on something else. So let's talk about the actual versus perceived costs of compliance, right? So your perceived costs, let's say you have about $900K spend on FTEs. This includes, salary, bonus, as well as benefits, right? All in, let's call it 900. And then for your external audits, let's call it 250. These are not crazy numbers. These are very normal numbers we see for clients who are operating maybe 3 to 4 products and have, maybe 4 compliance frameworks per product. So their total all-in cost that they think they're spending is about, $1,150,000. What their actual costs are, right, all in, is closer to 1.9 because of the tooling costs, because of the GRC tool management time, because of the engineering and IT time. I mean, if you take 4,000 hours of IT, which is, again, very much in line with everything that with clients that we see as we do these things, when you have consulting fees that are for your internal audits, for your advisory services, your costs quickly approach, that $2 million mark, which is almost 2x what you would have thought they were, even though some of this stuff is not necessarily cash going out the door in that first year. So let's talk about how CaaS actually changes this scenario, right? So how does CaaS change things? So first of all, as I mentioned, CaaS, or compliance as a service, if you can think of it that way, you could call it GRC as a service, you could call it managed GRC services, whatever you want to call it. But what we're specifically talking about is a service provider who handles and runs your security compliance program on your behalf, right? You still have, you're still in charge, but they are running the program. They're going to gather the evidence. They're going to support all of your external audits. They're going to interface with the external auditors. They're going to implement and maintain a GRC tool for you. This, by the way, this works. You get a lot more savings if your CaaS provider is also building and implementing and running the GRC tool in as well, because they're the ones who are going to be using it every day. They're going to be doing the continuous monitoring. They're going to help do that initial controls framework build for you. They're going to coordinate, they're going to keep you in the loop and actually use your time very well versus you having to always be involved. They're going to give you a lot of time back. And they're going to run all of the work streams that are required to maintain compliance, right? Your information security risk assessments, your tabletops, if you want them to do that, business impact analyses. The things that are required in ISO, PCI, SOC 2, those kinds of work streams, they'll take care of, unless you prefer another team to do that. But that's what we're talking about here. And so when you have a managed service provider who can do all of that for you, your costs change dramatically. So we mentioned earlier that in the original case, your actual costs were around 195. Your cash spend was around 1.4 million. That's actually cash out the door. With CaaS, it's very based off of what we've seen historically and the amount of savings that clients can realize. Generally, their FTE spend drops. Obviously, if your program is much bigger, the opportunity for spend reduction is much higher. And I'll go over why that is in a second. But it's very reasonable that CaaS could drop fees from or costs from 1.9 total to about 950, 938 in this case, based off of what we've seen elsewhere. It can drop your engineering fees down by about two-thirds. So you go from about 4,000 hours to about 1,350, 1,500 hours of engineering time. And it also can drop your external audit fees down because your external auditors are actually doing less work, right? They're having to sit through fewer walkthrough meetings. They're having to review, less evidence generally. Their experience is greatly streamlined. So it's actually an incentive. That's why it's an incentive for them as well to be able to play ball and work with you as you're trying to do this, because they are going to be, it's going to be a better experience for them as well. And so what you can actually see here is, actual cost reduction of over $1 million, but just call it at $1 million in this case. And this is, again, a very realistic scenario based off of what we've seen with other clients and their cost reduction, what they've seen, what they actually experienced. Additionally, from a cash perspective, their cash spend about halved in this case, maybe a little less than halved, but about halved in this case. And that's also very typical of what we see. So where does the cost savings come from? Like, how does it work? Well, number one, what we call resource elasticity. So when you have a security compliance program, you are staffing up generally for the peak of that program, like the peak demand of that program. And if y'all, any of y'all are aware, a security compliance program is very cyclical, right? So when you have your external audit, obviously that's a peak time. When maybe your internal audit or your readiness assessment, that's another peak time. But there's a lot of portions in the year that are more downtime or off season. So if you staff up to the highest level, you're basically keeping a bunch of resources that you don't need that don't have a full workload during that period of time. People can make themselves busy, but the demand there's not necessarily demand for them to be that busy. Whereas in a compliance as a service model, the way that we can realize quite a bit of savings is we scale up and scale down resources on the project, in the program based off of the actual demand, right? So you're not paying for resources that aren't required at the time, and you can capture that savings as a part of that's how you can capture a tremendous amount of savings, because the work still needs to get done in the peak time, but you can you don't have to staff up for that level for the rest of the time. Additionally, when you have tooling that's built for purpose, it introduces a tremendous amount of efficiencies. Efficiencies in that it allows you to actually have a consolidated controls framework. It allows individuals to self-serve and to manage things in one place, which reduces a lot of overhead for both your security compliance team as well as the engineering side or the non-GRC folks who are involved. In those workflows, I mean, to save a tremendous amount of time. Additionally, obviously a CaaS program is going to come with compliance and security expertise. So you're not having to go elsewhere for security consulting knowledge. It's right there already. The people who are doing the work, who are partnered with you, who are assigned, who are working on your account, they are experts in those fields. And if they don't know a question, I'll speak for Risk 360. We have people internally who probably know the answer if they don't know the answer. And our team has a tremendous amount of reps seeing the exact same thing that they've seen here elsewhere, and they can bring that knowledge in without you having to go out to another security consultancy and accrue fees in that way. We have defined playbooks. Like for all these things we've talked about, this is a well-built machine that knows how to run. So we're not figuring out anything for the first time. Generally, when it comes to any of these processes, we've done all this before multiple times. Obviously, your organization is unique, as is every other organization, and requires a bespoke and intentional level of individual attention. And from a principles perspective, we know how the process should look. That we have a framework for solving the problems, though the language and the specific situation or applications that we're talking about may be unique to you. And then lastly, the compliance harmonization. That is tremendous cost savings as a part of this whole process, and that's really how we're able to do a lot of what we do here, and make it worthwhile. So where does that leave us, right? So every organization is going to have, I would say, if you are looking for cost savings when it comes to cybersecurity, and you have non-insignificant security compliance burden, right? You have maybe more than one product, or you have one product that has multiple compliance frameworks and it's a relatively large product. We would love to talk to you and help you actually think through the cost analysis to put together that business case. Maybe it doesn't make sense for you, right? Like maybe we do the numbers and you say, hey, look, from a the juice is just not worth the squeeze here. That's okay, right? But for some of you, I imagine, if you have a very large company, you're multiple products, there is probably a lot more meat on the bone than you would think, right? In particular, if you're looking to reduce your security spend, this can be a very powerful tool for you as you work on that project, as you work on that problem. And like I said, whether you are whether you have a portfolio of companies, or whether you have a portfolio of products inside of your own company with multiple compliance requirements, we'd love to talk to you and just to meet. I'll have Andy actually put my email in the notes, or in the notes for this webinar. If you have a question, if you want to connect and just whiteboard out maybe the problem statement or like what you're looking at, love to have that conversation with you. Andy will share that. Andy will share that here in a moment. So with that's what I had. I wanted to keep it tight for y'all. I know that y'all have busy mornings, and I wanted to just go over the how the sausage is made and how compliance as a service can save you potentially $1 million. Anyway, we'll take questions now.
Yes, Chris, for sure. Thank you so much for the presentation. So we do have a few that came in, and I'll just pop right into them. So one of the first ones that I have here is, how do I make sure I get the right scope from the start?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically what we do when we start this process is we sit down and we really map out the whole organization, right? So what are all the products? Who are all the individuals involved? Are you owned by a parent company? What are the parent company's responsibilities? And in that process, we build what's called you probably know it as a RACI, but a responsibilities matrix. And that responsibilities matrix really helps inform, as we get the controls built, who is going to own which. And then from that, it falls out, oh, this actual security process is owned by this other team over here. So now we know how to get them involved and where to assign owners. But that's how we typically approach it, is we build a RACI for the security program.
Got it. Thank you, Chris. All right, so next one I have here is what should I look for in a tool to make something like this work?
Yeah, great question. So from a tooling perspective, you need to have a tool that can consolidate or can have a controls module, right? So call it whatever you want. I know a lot of products have different names for it. The product, our product, Full Circle, has, I mean, a controls module that's called controls. And in that controls module, you can actually list all the controls. You can tie each of those controls to individual evidence requests, and then you can tag each control as well to different compliance frameworks. So what that allows you to do is to have one single control that's mapped to multiple compliance frameworks, a control that is mapped to multiple evidence requests, and you can have an evidence request that's mapped to multiple controls, right? So it's a many to many mapping. That is really the core of this. In addition to that, I would highly recommend that that tool also have some way of managing vendors, some way of managing risks, some way of tracking issues or like gaps or findings. All of those things together are going to allow you to have a single tool that consolidates your experience and again saves you money.
Great, Chris. Thank you. All right, so actually we've got one more, and I would say, hold on. Okay, here it is. Any tips on getting buy-in from other departments that would be involved in this?
Yeah, great question. So as a part of this, quite a few departments tend to be impacted. What they tend to forget when you say that is that they're already impacted by security compliance. You're already asking them for things. You're already escalating things to them throughout the year when things are either late or you have a finding. So it's a good opportunity. So based off of that, Racy, that is how I begin having conversations with folks to say, hey, this is what is your responsibility currently. Here's how we're planning on changing that, like operating that. And here's what you can expect from a cost reduction perspective. Here's what you can expect from or time reduction perspective is probably how they would receive it better. And here's how we're going to communicate you. Here's how we're going to coordinate everything. And here's where you can also see status of things, right? The tool, as we going back to the previous question, your tool should have a dashboarding function that allows everybody who's involved to see what's delinquent, what's on time, so that they can self-serve and also take ownership and accountability. That tends to be the best way of this working.
Sounds great, Chris. Thank you so much. I think that does it from the question standpoint, man. Thank you so much. Great presentation, and I'll leave it with any parting words for us.
No, that was great. Thank you. Thank you, Andy. I guess with that, everyone, thank you for your time. I'll give everyone a little bit of time back this morning. But sincerely, we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to help you think through the problem. It's a hard problem to solve for sure. In particular, cost reduction is never easy. It's never a fun conversation, but we would love the opportunity to help. We believe we do have a solution for this that can really move the needle for you, in some cases very significantly. And we just love the opportunity to chat. Anyway, thank you everyone for your time. Y'all have a wonderful rest of your morning.